This is Strictly Business, presented by the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. Sponsored in part by the law offices of Young Wooldridge, San Joaquin Community Hospital.
And welcome back to Strictly Business. I'm Nathan Ollie, Manager of Government Affairs at the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. More and more people are staying connected well past quitting time at work. We've all got one of these that is more of a leash than a help sometimes. But that prolonged connectivity can affect both the company's and the employees' performance. And here to explain more is our good friend Robin Paggi. She's the training coordinator for WorkLogic HR. And thanks for being here again, Robin.
Thanks for inviting me.
So most businesses, we do here at the Chamber as well, give their employees a phone for company use. So what are some of the benefits of doing so?
One is that the company can then control data better. And so if an employee is doing business on their personal phone, it's more difficult for the employer to gain access to that data, especially if the employee decides to leave the company.
Oh, I
and
see.
Sometimes they take all that data with them. So
Okay.
that's one of the best benefits of it.
So privacy concerns, I guess, if I'm using company email on a personal device. Okay.
That's right.
Now, when do you think we started to see this shift to people becoming too connected to their devices?
Well, one of the things, the increase in cells and cell phones happened in 2000. And so I don't know if people became more connected at that point, but a lot more people got phones at that
Okay.
point. Recently, people have demonstrated that they're spending time on their phones up to 3 hours a day. And I heard research this morning on the Today Show said that teenagers are spending up to 7 hours a day on their phones.
Wow.
Yes, so that's a whole lot of connection.
And that's talking, that's data, that's
It's mostly
everything.
texting.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
texting
Yeah,
is the
I
culprit.
shut mine off for an hour, and there's sort of a withdrawal factor at times.
There is, and cell phone addiction is becoming something that is real. However, it's not recognized by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so employers don't have to do anything to accommodate employees who are addicted to their
Wow.
phones. But yes, it is.
Stay tuned, right?
It is becoming an addiction.
So, what are some of the implications of this constant connectivity in the workplace?
Well, in the workplace is that it's a decrease in productivity. There's lots of studies that have demonstrated that multitasking is not really efficient. And a lot of people are under the assumption that they can, or under the impression that they can do lots of different things at the same time. Our brain just does not work that way. And so if we are working on a report and then we stop to text somebody and then we're working on the report and then somebody comes into our office and talks to us and then we go back to the report, all of that interruption decreases productivity by about 40%.
Wow.
Studies have demonstrated, yes. So multitasking is very inefficient. And so constantly being connected, constantly checking your phone, checking your Facebook update, all of that kind of stuff is a big drain on productivity.
So, I would imagine then it has a corresponding impact on the bottom line.
Absolutely, yes. A decrease in productivity means the bottom line is decreased as well.
Okay. So, what can an employer do to make sure that employees aren't constantly glued to the phones, and what can employers do?
Well, one of the things that people say is they check their phones and Facebook and that kind of stuff so much because they're bored. And so one of the things that employers can do is make sure employees are busy.
Okay.
And they are giving challenging assignments that require their attention. And so that's one of the things that they can do. But of course, the other thing that they can do is create a policy for cell phone use at work.
So, not just busy work, not just piles of paperwork, but really challenging and stimulating
Challenging work that engages people's brains. And that way they won't be seeking to fill those gaps in entertainment because the job will keep them motivated and engaged.
Oh, okay. Now, you did mention a policy. What type of policy should employers have for cell phone use, and what types of things should be included in such a policy?
Policies should communicate expectations.
Okay.
That is the reason for having policies, and they're not to be punitive. They are just simply to say this is what the employer expects of employees. And so policies should include when cell phones can be used, when they should not be used, that they need to be on vibrate, that they're not used in meetings. So anything the employer wants to have in the policy to set the expectations. one of the things that employers and supervisors make mistakes in is assuming everyone has common sense and will use this common sense when it comes to everything, including cell phone use. And so the employer should not assume that the employee is going to have the same idea of what's appropriate use of the cell phone at work. The employer and supervisors need to clearly lay out exactly what the expectations are, so there are no misunderstandings and there doesn't have to be punitive measures.
And I would imagine that there could be some generational differences in
Yes.
interpreting how a cell phone is appropriately used at work. Is that
That's exactly
Yeah.
right. And as I said, teenagers spend
Uh-huh.
up to 7 hours on the phone. And so you've got some folks who think that it's perfectly fine to be constantly connected. But one of the things I would like to put in here is that cell phone use itself is not the only thing that drains productivity. People checking their phones for text or what have you is the same thing as people making frequent bathroom stops or constantly stopping to talk with their coworkers or hanging out at the copy machine and continuing conversation. So it's not just cell phone use that is a problem. It's anything, any kind of behavior that is a drain on productivity that employers need to be aware of. So the cell phone is not the enemy,
Right.
And so they shouldn't attack it as such.
and obviously there are benefits to having cell phones in the
Yes,
world,
quite a bit. And one of the things I do not encourage employers to have a no cell phones policy at work. There are some employers that have tried it, and FedEx is one of them. And they had to do it because employees would not stay off of their phones. But that is going to have mostly a negative effect to employees if you tell them they cannot use their phones while they're working. So that's something that I discourage employers from doing.
Now,
But
is that a morale issue? Is that
absolutely,
why? Or-
yeah. I mean,
Okay.
and it punishes everybody when not everybody needs to be punished.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I discourage employers from doing. If somebody is abusing their privilege of having a cell phone at work, punish that person or discipline that person. Don't discipline
Don't
everybody.
make blanket. Right.
Exactly. Nobody gets to use their phone anymore because Bob misused his phone.
Okay. I see. Now, what are some of the common penalties that an employer can seek to hand down if a cell phone is abused in the office?
It's just like any other type of infraction.
Okay.
If you've got a policy and somebody is violating the policy, you start with reminding them that there is a policy and that they are not abiding by the policy. And then you go into a stronger conversation that is documented as a verbal warning. And if it's still a problem, a stronger conversation that is a written warning, etc. So it's handled just like any other policy infraction or something that is preventing the employee from getting work done.
And I would imagine that cell phones in the workplace, this is a relatively new development. I would imagine a lot of times an education process and a clear understanding of the expectations is what will solve the problem rather than escalating, I would imagine.
Exactly. And that's the thing. If an employer creates a policy, have a discussion with employees when you are implementing the policy so that they know exactly why the policy is being implemented and what it's all about. And so employers tend to make mistakes when they just hand out a policy, there's no explanation behind it, and then they begin to punish people as a result of not adhering to that policy. So policies are there to communicate expectations so everyone is successful. And if an employer approaches it like that and lets people know that the employer wants employees to be successful, but they need to be productive as well. And so that's why they have policies in place. They get better results that way.
Okay. Now we're talking a lot about abuse of personal cell phone time. What sort of recommendations would you have for someone that is maybe doing the company's connected work after hours on weekends, things like that? That can be a concern as well.
Yes, and the expectation for employers to have of employees to constantly be connected is damaging. It's not helping productivity, it's hindering productivity. People need to be disconnected from work. And some companies have caught on to that and are making sure people are disconnected by 6 p.m. 6 p.m., they no longer have access to company emails. They have to disconnect from the workplace for a while. So there's lots of studies that are showing that people are constantly connected and that the employer is expecting them to be constantly connected. That does not help people do their jobs better. It hinders them. People need to have a disconnect time. So that's what employers need to do. The other thing they need to be aware of is that hourly employees who are connected to emails after work need to be paid for that time.
That's right.
And so the expectation, if an employer has an expectation that hourly employees will be checking their emails and will be available to respond to those emails at all hours, they're going to have to pay them for that time and overtime usually.
It's the same as being on call.
That's exactly right.
So probably a best practice then is if you're an hourly employee and you don't want to get into an overtime situation at 5 o'clock or whenever the shift ends, no email. You're
no
not
emails.
Connected.
That's
Okay.
exactly right. Or no texting or no phone calls either.
Right. So,
Yeah.
Well, Robin, it's always good to talk to you. Some really good information about the use of mobile technology in the workplace, and we really do appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this with more Strictly Business. Stay tuned.